Call to order our Transit and Transportation Committee. We have one item today on our agenda, Brookside Drive Safety Initiative, and I'll turn it over to our Assistant City Manager, Michael Moore, to get us started.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you. Bradley Kimbrell from our Transportation Department is going to lead us through some discussions, and just to frame this up a little bit for everyone, I'm sure he will do this as well, but we had an opportunity here following some changes at Conn Middle School, at Conn Elementary School, excuse me, with the way they'd handled queuing, which resulted in a fair amount of excess pavement on the ground. It had been put in at the time to permit their queuing lines. With that came some other unintended consequences when that came out, and we'd seen some sort of unsafe driving behaviors out there, people trying to cut around and do number of things. We had a couple of options for that, and we've got some community feedback. And again, a lot of these things come down to just choices about how we want to handle either a parking situation or a bike lane situation, and Bradley will walk us through those things and some of those options that we've got today.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, council members. Bradley Kimbrell, Transportation. Hopefully we can cover a topic that we're all a little familiar with, at least. I believe a colleague gave a presentation back in June. I do recognize the complexity, sensitivity of the matter, and as we walk through these, our presentation hopes to be clear, as well as stick to kind of what we believe to be the fundamental elements. There will be a recommended action at the end of the presentation for you all to consider. And obviously a ton of staff available to help answer those questions. What I'd like to emphasize, this is directly related to a current safety matter. So we believe there is a need to act if possible. So real quick, today's agenda will be pretty quick. There'll be some quick background. We'll go over the conditions, and Michael teed us up pretty nice for some of the conditions that are driving these details. We'll talk about the proposal, and again, have a lot of backup slides as well related to some of the details. So just to give us some proximity, Brookside Drive, I've highlighted there in the middle. It's inside the Beltline. It's south of the Atlantic Capitol intersection. This highlighted portion is really where our focus is going to be, and you'll understand a little bit on the next couple slides of why that is. This would be north of Glasscock, up to Frank Street, which is the entrance at Conn. Okay, so again, background, a little over a year ago, March 23, staff started receiving some comments from the public related to concerns directly related to, let me get that off. Directly related to aggressive driving, speeding, again, through that section south of the Conn driveway. Through those conversations with the public, we also heard about the concerns about lack of availability of parking along the corridor, and then as well as the bike and pedestrian safety connectivity. So this slide, again, just wanted to highlight what was already described. So Conn Elementary on the left side, that was the previous site, and you could see how internal queuing was insufficient, and we used about 900 feet of Brookside Drive to accommodate the parent pickup and drop-off queue. On the right, around that 2021 timeframe, the new school opened. And now, due to internal queuing, we have about 100 foot of needed queuing. So significantly less space needed for that. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. I thought this shows it pretty well. This is the existing condition on Brookside Drive. And that red arrow essentially is that 800, 900 foot distance of the delta of queue. What we now have is a condition where the road is just simply too wide, there's too much pavement available, and there's no demand on that right lane. So what we're getting reports on, aggressive driving, drivers will take that right lane speed past the vehicle in the inside lane and then overtake them before they get to the Frank Street Conn Elementary intersection. So again, back in 2023, staff started to get these comments. We started doing our investigation. All the programs shown on the screen here came together. We worked together. We talked about it as staff. So the Neighborhood Traffic Management Group, the parking folks, Friends in Vision Zero, as well as our bike and pedestrian program. We came together. We looked at this several times over the last year, engaged with the public. I do want to reiterate, staff's priority here is safety. And so we do take the existing condition very seriously. And so each program came to the table and we talked about what's available to us in our toolbox, if you will. And that's where you'll find the staff's proposal comes back to help address the condition. So we'll run through the programs pretty quick. The first is the Neighborhood Traffic Management Group. This corridor was studied a handful of times over the last 2 years, formally evaluated. Back in 2020, we reduced the speed on Brookside down to 30. And then you'll see in the table from a evaluation standpoint, the current speeds are that 34 to 36 miles per hour. And there's one reported crash, speed-related crash in the last 3 years. Vehicle volumes are a little over 6,000 per day. The bike and pedestrian program, we looked at this. I do want to emphasize, because this will become relevant in a moment, Brookside Drive was identified on the long-range list. However, it was not, it did not rank high enough to be in the 10-year priority project list. I went back and looked today on that 2016 plan. It's ranked at number 136. So as far as opportunities, because we do know, we've heard from the public about the importance of bike infrastructure and the connectivity in the area. Opportunities would be city resurfacing, which is at least 5 years out, what we're hearing from our street maintenance team. But also, as the bike and pedestrian plan update wraps up over the next 6 to 9 months, spring of 2025, it is an opportunity that Brookside Drive could be reassessed based off of the updated prioritization, and at that point, we would determine what the ranking could be. Again, that's spring of 2025, and I believe, yep, here we go. We got a slide showing the timeline of the update. So we've had a kickoff, and then now a couple of steering committee meetings, some engagement sessions over those months to come, and then again, the final report back to you all in the spring. And I would say, for anyone interested, staff did look at bike options for street cross section for Brookside Drive, and I have those in backup slides if you're interested. Okay. This is a quick picture of the roundabout to the north end of Brookside Drive. So this is north of the Conn driveway. So this is the city-initiated project, a part of the Blunt Person Corridor project. So we can share information about what status of each of those projects are, but from a continuity of infrastructure standpoint, just wanted to highlight the roundabout project that will extend sidewalk down Brookside to Vale, and then the sidewalk projects within Vale and Plainview. Curb space proposal, so we're going to get into the details of what staff is offering as recommendation. This sketch is meant to capture where we think, where staff would propose the buffering as well as the on-street parking availability for the corridor. Also, because we've heard comments from the community about the development activity on the area, I've highlighted those here. Again, the intent with an on-street parking proposal would be to establish friction along the corridor and address that aggressive driving behavior. So a quick summary slide of the engagement activity that staff has had with the community for the better part of a year. So you can see we started receiving those inquiries in the spring of '23. We engaged with BPAC, went to the public a handful of times after, within the fall of '23 and then the spring earlier this year, ultimately to share with them the intent of a parking proposal. So again, getting to where staff is at this point, we recognize there is an existing safety condition, and we believe, for your consideration, that an alternative to put in a parking proposal would help resolve the issue. This solution, this adjustment to the curb space could be implemented as quickly as 45 days from your action. We also would recommend you direct staff to follow up after 12 months to evaluate the utilization of that parking, as well as provide an update to the bike and ped plan at that time. We would know how this section of Brookside would rank. So at this time, wanted to keep it brief for your discussion and questions.
Definitely thank you for the presentation. Before we have any questions here from the council, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this? I have two. Okay. All right. I will get to that. But before I do, one question I have is this street wide enough to do parking and bike lanes?
Great question. So one of the scenarios, let me make sure I see my notes here. So these are the cross sections that we put together. So in this scenario, there's parking on the southbound side. So that's the left of your screen. We're showing parking on one side, and then a bike facility only on one side to handle one-way bike traffic. So that's one scenario. And so southbound, coming south of Con toward Lascaux, the cyclist would be in lane, in street. These would be, and then the next two options would be no parking scenarios.
Okay. All right. So it's not wide enough to do both on both sides. We can only have a bike lane on one side with no parking, or have parking on one side with a shared lane on that side.
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions from council before I open it up for those who have comments?
Is it okay? Sorry. Okay. Thank you so much. How fast is traffic? The safety concern that you're referencing, is it the speed of the traffic on the street? What is that safety concern?
So it's my understanding that the aggressive driving behavior that's being observed, it would exceed the current speed limit, which is at 30 miles per hour. So the vehicle on the inside lane traveling normal speed limit, and then the aggressive driver is driving beyond that safe speed, that posted speed. So driving faster than that, and can ask friends in Vision Zero who may have that report as well, but definitely driving fast enough to pass that vehicle.
And if it was a bike lane, then cars couldn't use that as a passing lane.
So in that scenario, that's correct. We would be utilizing some measure, whether that's on-street parking or a bike facility, to use up that pavement so vehicles couldn't go into that space.
Either way, whether it was bike or parking, they would not be able to make that pass.
That's the intent. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You may have already answered this, but I got up and asked Assistant Manager Moore if we could get a copy of this presentation because it was a little hard to see on the screen. It's in our inboxes now.
You should be coming to your inbox.
It is, yes. But the roundabout and the sidewalk improvements you mentioned, what is the timeline on those?
Yes, let me get my notes. Great. So roundabout there with Automotive Way, and this is the latest design on our screens. The design is complete. Next steps, the project is moving into right-of-way acquisition. We hope construction could start next year.
And regarding the right-of-way acquisition, and this may be opening way too big a can of worms, but do we have space to do like more of a multi-use path that could be shared for bicycle and pedestrians rather than just a traditional sidewalk here? Or is it intended to just be a traditional sidewalk?
So this would be on the section south of the roundabout.
Going down Brookside, because you had mentioned it was going to bring sidewalk improvements down that corridor.
I think that was the one on Van South was that was the other.
Sorry,
one.
whichever
Yeah, it wasn't this one.
whichever improvements you referenced, we're going to provide additional sidewalk connections.
Correct. So the project does construct sidewalk south of the roundabout down to Vale. And I have I can go back to that slide if need be.
Yeah, I think the Vail one.
Yeah. Can get you there.
Kenneth Ritchie with Transportation. So the Vale Plainview sidewalk project was one of the backlog from our petition sidewalk program. And so with that, we traditionally have looked at, because these are neighborhood character, 6 feet. So that's really what we've got planned right now is just that extension of that 6-foot sidewalk right now to create the connectivity. And certainly understanding that as the bike plan plays out, looking at those opportunities as to what the facilities may be long-term, because I do believe that Brookside, at least based off that 2016 programming, I do believe is looked at for bike lanes. It just wasn't prioritized in that 10-year plan. But certainly as we get through the bike plan update, we anticipate that likely that same prescription may hold, but we'll know more here in the coming months.
Okay, thanks.
So within that 10-year plan, when or if bike lanes are added, then the parking goes away?
That certainly would be one of those, as we get to that point as part of this, that would be one of the, I think, points of engagement we would have in the future. But certainly, as we establish that as part of that new prioritization plan, that would set the policy guidance for this corridor. So certainly, we would be looking at replacing any parking if that's the way that the bike plan pans out when we bring those forward to council next spring.
Okay. Councilor Harris first.
I wonder if y'all could speak to any of the reflections or recommendations from BPAC when they were a part of this. And I know we've got someone here who might be speaking to that, but just curious from staff's perspective.
Absolutely. Again, staff has brought BPAC into these conversations a handful of times over the last year. Summer 2023, I believe our coordinator, Barbara's here as well, brought to light, some of the challenges, some of the wishes, requests from the community. It's just an acknowledgement that Brookside Drive is not on the 10-year priority project list with our current plan, but we knew we were kicking off the new plan. And so through those conversations, it was just discussing that current policy establishes that Brookside Drive is not programmed at this time. And so just acknowledging again that we have a safety issue that we would like to resolve with some measure, but currently putting bike infrastructure on Brookside Drive is not something that's been funded at this time.
And the funding difference between putting in parking versus the bike infrastructure, is that quite different?
It can be. Again, I want to make sure that I'm clear. So providing a parking solution here between more or less Edmond to the Conn Elementary driveway is estimated around $3,000 for the striping. Putting in some form of a bike facility, our initial estimates are somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $15,000, but we would have to stop the infrastructure 100 feet south of Conn Elementary's driveway. So it gets a little problematic because what we're doing is we're introducing a bike infrastructure along a couple blocks, but that cyclist then has to merge back into the travel lane because that other curb at Conn for 100 feet turns into a right turn lane again.
Was there consideration of the bike lane headed south? Was that the one option that had bike lane on one end side and then parking on the other?
In the scenarios that we looked at, I do not recall the southbound being evaluated, but I can look to the team to see if that was studied.
Yeah, I'm just curious about that decision to only look at the north.
It was evaluated, the same condition essentially applies. At Glasscock, there's a turn lane, and then at Frank and Conn Elementary, there's a turn lane. So we lose the available width to run continuous bike infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, I saw two hands come up. If you could come up to the podium, since it's two people, I'm just gonna do 4 minutes each. You don't have to use it, and if you go over, the building won't fall. Whoever's first.
Hello, my name is Mary Jo Gallenbeck. I'm a member of the City of Raleigh's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I do want to speak on behalf of the commission. When the Brookside project was presented to us, we did inquire about adding additional parking on the road, knowing that, south of Glasscock, there is a bike lane. And we objected to the premise of adding the bike vehicle parking because we understand how contingent that is to remove it once it's been given. And that's a historic response when proposing to put infrastructure in for active travel users. And so we question why it seemed to be fast-tracked. And those are just some of the reflections from the committee meetings.
Question, because from what I'm hearing, there's a safety issue that is being brought up, and I've seen what I'm hearing described on other streets. If you have someone that's getting ready to make a left-hand turn, cars are swinging by them or speeding past them because of the width of the road. Was the safety issue ever talked about within the meeting, and what was the opinion of the board?
Well, we can't argue with the fact that a vehicle itself is used for traffic calming. And so it would prevent aggressive driving behavior if you block the driver from entering a space. And that's what the on-street parking would have provided. And we see the value in that. But we also see the value in investments in active travel infrastructure that meets the comfort level of the majority to use it. I mean, we really just haven't pushed the needle in advancing and inducing that mode of travel.
Okay.
So that's one. But I do want to also spend 2 minutes just to discuss my job position at Oaks and Spokes as the Safe Routes to School Program Coordinator. And in North Carolina, there have been many new Safe Routes to School Program Coordinators added to the staff and a variety of agencies. My position at Oaks and Spokes is funded by the Wake County's Department of Health and Human Services, and they just added 2 more program coordinators to their staff. So now there are 3 representatives in this area. The other agencies would be the Department of Transportation, and other agencies are the school districts themselves. And these were all funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So these positions are to enhance that community's ability to improve the conditions on streets so that children can travel. And as we move forward in the city of Raleigh, I'd like to recognize those roads that do border along our school district's campuses. Conn Elementary is one of them. On any given school day, if you were to visit Conn Elementary, you would see approximately 20 children's bicycles locked up at their bike racks. They're even now considering increasing the number of bike racks that they have. So Conn Elementary does have a community that does walk and bike. And so I feel really passionate about the city's focus to identify those roads and add the traffic calming to reduce driver speeding in that space. 30 miles per hour on a road that goes past a school campus is too high. I prefer 25 miles per hour, but I do know that 20 miles per hour is implemented throughout the state, and that would include roads that are managed by NCDOT. So I'd like to understand, us to look deeper into why we can't lower the traffic speeds to 20 miles per hour consistently on roads that do that do run along our school campuses from kindergarten through senior years in high school. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but.
Okay. Actually, your comments, I have a question for staff, and it's around street types. How does street types impact speed limits within the city?
Hello, Will Shoemaker, Mobility Development. To answer Councilmember Branch's question about street types and speed limits, we look at street classification, street usage, and what the design speed is. So with Brookside Drive, this is a Avenue 2-lane undivided street section with over 6,000 vehicles per day. So based on current policy guidance, that street classification is a collector street. So that means that it is supposed to collect all of the surrounding local streets, collect them all, get them, and then get them out to the thoroughfares. So it is a local street, but it is meant to be the one that carries capacity to get out to the thoroughfares so you can get from your neighborhood to where you're trying to go. And so looking at this and looking at all of the use patterns, the current policy that the city has adopted is that streets that have these use patterns like Brookside are recommended at 30 miles an hour. One caveat is that during school times, we work with the Safe Routes to School in our school program, so there is a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit during school times, but from outside of those restricted times, the recommendation would be consistent 30 miles an hour.
Okay, thank you. So question for you, during school times, the speed limit does drop. Does that fall within the criteria of what
The
work you're
my
doing?
ask? No, it doesn't. And the reason is that it's unenforced. So you can have the sign up there, but that doesn't induce driver behavior to reduce their speeds when traveling in this space. For a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to dive into. But so I think that I appreciate the way the transportation system has in the past evaluated roads based on level of service for the motor vehicle travel. I think it's hindered us. I think there's a reason why traffic fatalities is the #1 reason for children's deaths in North Carolina. And so I think the level of service should not be about monitoring or preventing the congestion of motor vehicle traffic, but it should be evaluated based on safety. And I believe that lowering the speeds by 10 miles per hour through that one stretch of space will not impact the number of vehicles that flow through that space. And that's, proposal. I don't have any theories behind it, but I do know that driver behavior does not change because you put up a sign. Driver behavior changes when you put up infrastructure that induces that driving behavior. And hence the reason for the on-street parking. If a driver parks their car there, it can reduce the driver's speed because they have to swerve around it. It blocks a certain low. But I also live near Glenwood Avenue, north of the 5 Points intersection. And on a regular basis, we have drivers that crash into telephone poles or parked vehicles because of the lack of anticipation and maneuvering that's needed to go around a parked vehicle. So there's lots of reasons to argue against it, but I'll let my colleagues continue on.
Okay,
Thank you.
My name is Athena Wallen. I am a Brookside Drive resident. I have so much to say, and I'm really overwhelmed by it, so I apologize. I want to move this conversation away from parking versus bike. It's not parking versus bike lane. It isn't. And sorry to jump all the way back to 2023 in the springtime, but Councilmember Branch, I stood there on the sidewalk meeting you because we were concerned about flooding issues and the urban development happening right on the lot. And from that conversation, this parking proposal came up. So forgive me for being a little upset because I wanted to be talking about nature this entire time to City Council, and I have to talk about cars. So this proposal, it jeopardizes the only grace that the street gives in equity, which is space and visibility for everybody. And my concern is that when you take a familiar street that has those reckless drivers, you are going to pepper it with parked cars, and those reckless drivers are still going to exist and make those instances more deadly. It doesn't require a lot of speed to just stop a human being. And that's the scary thing. We are promoting multi-modality everything. We want people on bikes and scooters. We have e-bikes coming up. And do you know how fast somebody on the street on a bicycle looks when they're going 15 miles per hour? 7? 3? Are you looking for them when you pull out of your driveway? Are you looking for that difference of movement on the sidewalk, in the road, looking for cars, pedestrians, and every other modality at every moment that you're driving? No. We have a responsibility to build infrastructure to also guide that education, guide those drivers into expecting cyclists and pedestrians. When you put more cars on a road, it tells us as pedestrians and cyclists that this is not our road. And if drivers navigate on those roads believing that only cars should be on those roads, that's a problem. And that's the problem that I face every day. I see it every day. When I ride on Glasscock heading from Raleigh Boulevard to Brookside, every time I have to move into the lane of traffic because there is a bump out of the sidewalk or that center aisle lane. I don't know the names. I have to take the risk that the person driving behind me will see me, acknowledge my need to merge into the lane, and respect it. I am 5'3" and slightly shorter on a bike. My head is approximately the same height as not rear view mirrors, but side mirrors. Do you know what I do when I need to look beyond an obstruction? I poke my head out. On Glasscock, I felt the wind of a truck passing by my ear, and that mirror just so close to me. But I still get on my bike and hope that the city of Raleigh will figure it out. Sorry, I wanted to say so much more.
So, thank you for coming. I just have a question. From what I'm hearing, you're asking that we do the bike lanes and not the cars on the street, just for clarity for myself.
I am suggesting that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If we can't do bike lane opportunities that we can do to start traffic calming and start putting people into the expectation of parked cars. We should have been doing more as the conversation was happening. That northern cap of Brookside is dangerous. And it has been a danger, and it is a current danger that does not get any attention.
Okay, so, because I'm asking questions for clarity.
Yeah, I know.
So, what I'm hearing is if we can't do bike lanes right now, are you saying you're for parking or no parking?
I'm saying you gotta readjust that parking plan to account for visibility of the people out of those cars. So if I could expand on the proposal itself, it puts additional parking at the intersection of Brookside and Glasscock, where there is already a lot of traffic and different modalities interacting. And actually, the way that it works right now is great. The left turn brings that queuing out of the way for residents to actually cross Brookside to get to their destination. In my mind, that's almost like a residential route. And then everybody going through Brookside or the neighborhood has their lane to turn. And it paces them, and it shows everybody stopping at the same time so eye contact and communication can be expressed. What it also does is it staggers those modalities while crossing the street. So it gives us a little bit of time to not feel like a burden to any driver. When I cross that intersection on my bicycle, I cross and then immediately try to get as close to the right lane as possible because cars will want to just shoot right by me. That won't be able to happen if cars are parked all the way up.
So I don't think so, and this is where I thank you for that because it's helpful. And staff, if you can speak to parking near intersections, because I think we have laws. I don't believe the parking is going to go all the way up to the intersection.
It was marked as in the proposal, so that's all the information that I was working on.
Staff, can you speak to that, to how, as far as the turn lanes and parking, how does that work at intersections? In case I've misspoken.
No, absolutely, and thank you for the question. I'll take us back to this slide. I think this will help some of that. So in this sketch, you can see where, again, this is a sketch. We'll work, if council chooses this option, we'll work to formalize this for the contractor that would put it in. But essentially in this sketch, what we're hoping to indicate, let me draw that. So areas adjacent to side streets or large driveways, we would create that buffer space to help with the sight distance, create that line of sight. That's so important that we know. Also, not great shown on this slide, but the bottom of that, yes, Councilmember.
No, it's fine. You can finish.
Okay. And then at the bottom of that slide is the Glasscock intersection. What we would want to do and work with our parking division and our vision safety team is work on some striped bump outs at the intersection. That would also help with line of sight and shorten the pedestrian crossing there too.
Okay.
Now I have a question.
Yes.
And you kind of answered it when you said striped. If we just paint here, people are going to park there anyway. Is there a plan for bollards or something like planters? Because if we allow parking and then just do paint buffered, they're going to park there anyway. And unless we have someone constantly monitoring it, it's just going to become a de facto parking lane. I mean, I take my scooter everywhere. I think people know this. I also live here. I scoot this route. I scoot here. It's parked out front. I cannot even tell you how many times there are cars parked in actual bollard bike lanes downtown, which is like a high visibility, high traffic area. And I know it's something we're working on. But here, where there's going to be no enforcement, it's just going to be like the Wild West. And if we paint the buffer zone, I guarantee you it's going to be filled with cars anyway. So I feel like if that's the answer for the visibility with the parking, I think we have to come up with a better solution for that.
Yes.
Go ahead. Can you speak into the mic?
It's the matter of catering to the maneuverability of people already on the road, but you're looking at a street with multiple driveways of varying widths.
Right.
And this is an older street. So for instance, my driveway is very narrow, and my driveway is the only one that is on a hill. The driveways up north, they actually have fixed their driveway to accommodate multiple cars and an easier turn in, turn out. So there are nuances that can't be accounted for when we approach designs like this with those static metrics.
You had a question?
Just wanted to kind of add in here. I'm curious if there is a constituency, I guess, of neighbors that are looking for this parking, and maybe Councilmember Branch, you can speak to that. But, I know we've gotten a lot of interest in this. I think some of our email traffic might have been, though, from months ago. So I'm having some challenge to remember kind of where folks were. As someone who also tries to bike to get around, I would love to see bike lanes here. I'd love to see protected, divided bike lanes with bollards. And so I do have some heartburn about adding parking. And I think to the point made that once we add it, it's very hard to remove. I also am aware of these redevelopments, and I believe there will be parking with each of those, at least 1 or 2 spots per unit. I don't know if it'll be enough for visitors, and I know that has come up in my conversations with neighbors. So that is an element, kind of part of this conversation.
Yeah, based on the conversations I've had, they don't have parking now. So some say they would love to have parking. Their biggest concern was the parking of redevelopment onto the street, and how they would get in and out of their own driveways. I think, again, based upon the how I've dealt with our interjected on parking issues where you have driveway cuts and everything else, I think a lot of it's going to come back to something that was said even by our last speaker. It comes down to enforcement. If we say no parking and we put in bike lanes, it goes back to the point that Councilman Milton made. How do we enforce no one's parking in the bike lanes? So I think the biggest thing staff is trying to figure out and what they're charged with is to minimize safety concerns and safety risks. And I think what we have to figure out from our stance, and do we have all the tools to give them to address some of these?
I saw some technology that,
The little smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw those too. Yeah.
I don't know how expensive that is, Michael.
I send it over to transportation to look at, so I think they're reviewing those
Sit
little.
on my desk right now.
Yeah, so, yes, sir.
I have a couple thoughts. One, if you look at Brookside north of like Monroe and Holden north of the park, that was redesigned maybe like 10 years ago with a painted bike lane that is never obstructed. I ride that all the time. There's never a car parked there. City does a good job maintaining the overgrowth. There are some curb cuts, I think, for parking there. And so that area seems to work fine. I get frustrated with this. Well, we have new development on Brookside south of the park, south of Glasscock, so we have to somehow allocate public space to parked vehicles. Like the folks who are buying these new townhomes, no disrespect to them, they come with one car garage. I've looked up the website, and so you're buying something where you have space for your personal vehicle in your garage, and anyone else who's going to come visit you will need to figure it out. I mean, that's just how it works. But this idea that we have a finite amount of public space and we need to make it free car storage for folks, like I don't really agree with that. And I think there's a better way to do it. It should be safe. So if we're having a safety issue now with queuing for the elementary school, we do need to address that. But I do think that when you put the parking in, and then we know that we have a 10-year plan to do something else here, more multimodal, it is going to create, whoever's sitting in these seats in 10 years is going to be hearing people saying, don't take my parking away. And so I don't want to create an expectation, but I'm wondering if there's a way we can address the safety concern with the queuing for the elementary school and maintain more of this public space for public good. I would be fine with some sort of compromise situation if there's space to do it. Like I said, north of the park, there is some ability for parking there with a bike lane, but I don't want to do anything that's going to make it less safe. And like I said, folks that are moving to the new things being developed there, the idea is for it to be walkable, right? I mean, you have retail there. You're so close to the Person Street corridor. You really don't. We want to create communities, particularly more urban cores, where you don't need a car. I know we'll get there eventually, but in the meantime, we have these like pressure points. But what I don't want to do is just forfeit all this public space because someone buys a townhouse with a one-car garage and wants to park another car on the street permanently. Like that doesn't work for me.
So just there are sidewalks on both sides of Brookside here. Yeah, towards once you get towards Frank, I think something goes away.
The west side does not have any sidewalk. Is that going to be addressed with the roundabout? I keep hearing about sidewalk connectivity for the east side, but I don't think there's suggestion of any kind of access.
She's talking about this.
So this image shows the current sidewalk inventory shown in the thin blue line, and then the limits of that project, which does construct sidewalk on the east side. It would not provide sidewalk on the west side down to Frank.
Is there a reason why?
I'm not familiar. I'll see if Kenneth, is there a limitation
So that gap currently between Vale and Automotive Way was one we had identified as a gap that really kind of, at least filling that as part of this project, created that continuous connectivity in the area. It does not establish it on both sides of the street, certainly, but that was a little bit of a scope enhancement from what the original scope of that roundabout project was, just to make sure that we close that gap, given the investments we were already looking at on Vale and Plainview.
Okay.
Is it not possible to add that to the scope of, to have it on both sides, or is that?
So certainly anything can be done with funding. I think it's just a matter of where the funding would come from. I think as conversations that we've had over the last couple of years as it relates to the 2017 bond, and certainly with a lot of our sidewalk programming, at least right now, a lot of that funding has been committed to other projects, so we'd have to look at reprioritization.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, and this part of Vale is actually north of where I think the biggest concerns are from the community anyway. Because Vale is between Imicon and Wake Forest Road. I think when we start really from Frank Street to Glasscock is the part you're concerned about. Okay, please speak. The mic.
The north cap of Brookside is what I'm most concerned about, because I feel as though the southbound traffic gets onto Brookside with no indication of what's ahead. And it's a very empty road with very little marking. So people do take advantage of that space. And I've never been passed on Brookside in my car by another person overtaking me heading north, but definitely heading south after that roundabout, it gets chaotic sometimes. I'm disappointed and frustrated that we can't have that conversation about addressing how to make that north cap safer. There are employees that have to cross Brookside at Vale Street to get to their work. There are no pedestrian facilities on that west side currently. So it doesn't tell a driver to look for them. So if you're heading southbound on Brookside and the first thing you see is just a big open road, no markings, no pedestrians, woo, no obstructions, what are you gonna do if you are a reckless driver, if you are an irresponsible driver looking for those opportunistic ways to get to the stop sign faster? I also just wanted to state that in May, when the proposal came back through and was sent saying, you know, we heard everything that you had to say, we're going to go ahead and do this as planned. I started to look for ways to help that northern cap, because I actually felt like this city was not going to do anything. And I see neighbors with groceries and kids walking through that mess. And I see small businesses trying to invite more people into that space. And that space is just cars. And by golly, we are already there as pedestrians and people on bikes. We are already there, and drivers need to be accustomed to sharing the road. It's not just about parking on Brookside. It's not just about parking versus bikes. If I am on my bike and I have to go off of a designated bike lane, that's because I have a different destination than what was laid down. But I should still be able to get to where I'm going with the respect that drivers give. And that's just sharing the road, knowing that I'm there, knowing that I have needs on that road too.
So let me ask this question, because and staff can correct me if I'm wrong. What brought us here was about the extra pavement towards Con, the 900 feet. So, and that part is south of Vale. So my understanding is, so I'm going to divide this in half. I'm going to talk about this from Con Magnet going towards Glasscock. And I want to focus on that part because that's the piece where, you know, I've heard about adding parking. So if we look at Con going north towards Wake Forest, we're not adding parking to that, are we? So is that still no parking?
Correct. This proposal has not included that section to date.
Okay, so north of Con, we're not doing anything other than that Vale project towards Wake Forest Road.
Correct. The Vale, Plainview, those are the sidewalk projects.
Correct, the
separate
sidewalk
from
projects.
This is really to address the safety concern.
Okay,
Separately, staff can look at that northern section to evaluate if there's an opportunity.
okay, all right, because that's where, because I hear you, but I want to make sure when we're talking about Vale, that's north of the school, and what brought us here is a part of the road south of the school.
And I'm trying to suggest it's
All of it. Yeah, you're saying it's all of it, and I think staff is looking at it holistically, but just this part for right now. So if I can, I'm going to hone, I see you, but I want to fine tune this question. If I can, I want to focus on the part right now from Con going down to Glasscock and your thoughts and opinions on that part. I know you're looking holistically. I get that, and I respect that, but I want to target it
Right.
on this part where we're making the changes.
My concern is that the sporadic addition of parking as it continues to fill out with cars, during that time, it is endangering pedestrians and people not in cars because it interferes with that visibility.
Okay. So you see it as a
yes.
visibility issue on Brookside.
Correct. And we're not doing enough in advance to, I hate using the word condition, but condition drivers to expect a traffic change.
Okay. So can you speak, if we add parking, how do we transition that?
So I'll let staff speak to that, but really kind of want to bring, these are frankly just the challenges that we have. And again, I wanted to just, so I think all the points we've heard today, super valid, don't discount any of them. And I just brought this up here really to just kind of reinforce, these are examples that we run into really all over Raleigh. We've got a set amount of space. The houses on the right, Councilmember Branch, were some of the original ones that were concerned about the speeding traffic. So that's kind of how we got this item in front of us on the right-hand side here. And so that's where we got the original concern from. And I think to Bradley's point, going back to the slide that kind of shows what can we do in this space, really the question becomes, do you look at parking or do you kind of look at bike infrastructure? That's kind of what you have in front of you here, you know, and there's a trade-off on both ways, again. So I don't want to discount anybody's comments because I think they all are valid from a sight distance standpoint. If council looked at parking, we definitely would want to look at sight distance at those intersections to make sure we've got visibility. So I just really wanted to reinforce this is a great example of the challenges that we just have in the department about what do we do with a confined amount of space here. So
I just want to confirm, if we choose bike lanes, are those funded?
No, ma'am. We, at this time, do not have any program funds to put bike infrastructure on Brookside.
So if we said, yeah, we want to go bike lanes and wait for the program, the safety issue still exists?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention before I have to go early, I apologize, but my take on this is I would prefer to move forward with bike lanes, and I just think we have to move almost in a radical fashion around our city core and put the money in to make this a safe place to walk, to bike, to do all the things. And if we throw in parking, yeah, I don't see it ever going away. And so I would rather see that we make an investment as a council, that we're going to invest in so many of these projects, many more than we have, because I don't know how many we can do a year, but it's not enough to get to the point where folks are going to feel safe letting their child bike to school, walk to school, all those things by themselves. And I think that is just a real loss when it comes to quality of life. So that's my thought on this.
Any other question?
Yeah, I just have a few thoughts. I was a little confused when we said we don't have the money for the bike lane because what's being proposed is a restriping for parking. So at the very least, we could restripe for cycle lanes. My concern would be people will park in them, which is why. But I also think if we do the parking, people are going to park in these buffer zones. So either way, whether we're doing a bike lane or the proposal for parking, I think we have to have some sort of infrastructure that. What was that? Right. There's going to have to be some vertical delineation, whether it's a parking area or a bike area, because if you just paint, people are going to park in the paint anyway. And so I agree with Councilmember Harrison. I think we do need to, if we're going to do anything here, I would prefer the bike lanes, and I think we need some delineation. If we do the parking, then we need delineation for that too, because at the very least, if we're doing the parking, we have to keep these buffer zones free. And if you put 12 unregulated parking spaces and then paint the corner, people are going to park right up to the corner. So I think either way, we got to find money for some delineation.
Yeah, I would just say, just keep in mind on the park, that's where Bradley had mentioned the 3,000 versus 15. So parking, you just literally putting some stripes on the ground. If we went bike infrastructure, to your point, to protect that, we'd have to look at some type of vertical, which is where Bradley had gone with the cost there.
So to the council, thank you. Thank you. Briefly, because I'm trying to get Councilman Harrison before she leaves.
I mostly just have a question because the proposal that got sent with the actions listed for today included a segment that says or suggests removal for no parking on the southernmost school, or starting from the southernmost school driveway, extending north by 500 feet on both sides. That is leading into a blind curve with no lines, and I think that is dangerous. So,
thank you. So what I'm hearing from, bring this back to council. So from what I'm hearing from two of my council members is you prefer us going with bike lanes, not to add any parking. My question for my council members is, we've been brought to us of a current safety issue. So what are suggestions on dealing with the safety issue?
Find the funding for we're not talking that much room. I would find the funding for the bike lanes now.
What does that look like, council?
So ideally, we'd love to report this out today, but if the committee's desire, we'll go back and look and see what we might be able to find and bring this back to you at a later point.
Why don't we report it out with a recommendation to find the funding for it?
I think we should give the recognition of that funding, because it'll be we'll be rehashing this at the table completely.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I think. We know this is a 10-year plan to put the bike lanes here anyway. So if we put the parking in and people say, well, why did you not do parking? We say, well, the parking is going to be ripped out in some time between now and 10 years anyway for bike lanes. So we don't want to create parking and an expectation of parking when we know it's going away. And if we have a safety concern now, we have to change the built environment of the street. And we already know that our plan calls for bike lanes here when funding comes around. I think we expedite that funding because we have a safety concern, and it's in committee for this reason. So I would recommend just finding, and we're not talking,
well, they
I'll
don't have,
stick them down myself.
They just gave an estimate on a number.
Right.
We don't know what that number is, and then.
That's fine. If we want to hold it in committee, that for you to bring us, that's fine.
If I may, just a point of clarification. So the bike plan will come back with a reprioritization of projects. When we say 10 years, it should, hopefully, given that we've done work on some of the other projects that were in the 2016 plan, reprioritize closer to the beginning. So it's not 10 years before this goes in. It would, I can't tell you when, but just as a point of clarification, that 10-year period is just a point of, that's the window for these kinds of planning exercises. So.
And the other reason why I'm willing to hold this, because at our next meeting in September, we're going to talk about bicycle lane design and implementation. So that's on the agenda for our next meeting.
I'm fine either way. I'm sorry I have to go.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. So with that, we'll just hold it until our next meeting and ask for staff to come back on what is the funding for bike lane implementation.
We will do some research and see if there's some internal resources that we may be able to reprioritize. We'll come back and share that with you at that point in time.
All right. And also, to make it more complicated, if I can, where this falls on the traffic calming as well.
So this does not qualify for
It
traffic
doesn't qualify at all, and it never.
Because of the traffic volumes, this does not fall under our policies for NTP.
And when's the last time we did that? You said, was that 23?
The evaluation,
Yeah.
I believe, it's been recent.
September 2023
September 2023?
was the last formal evaluation. That's right.
Okay. I'll wait until October to ask.
Can I say? Okay. So my thoughts, I love bike lanes. I mean, I'm not an avid biker, but I understand the need and I understand what the intention is and I get it. But right now, I don't understand how that addresses the safety concern. And this has been there for a year and staff is requesting a specific item that says, we're going to do this and then hold off. I understand we're afraid that we won't bring parking, take it back away. But that safety concern that staff has addressed is the reason of this. And this, I understand we're going to hold it and delay it, and in that same time, there's still a concern, and it's been held for a year. So I don't know what my thought is. I don't have a solution at the moment. I do appreciate the everyone speaking today and the recommendation from staff to kind of do both and say, hey, let's get this in so we can do that safety concern and then in the future. And I don't know what to do with that, but I'm really concerned with the safety concern.
So I will, go ahead.
So I just one point to bring up from a timing standpoint as it regards to further consideration. Given we're getting into the fall and into the
Weather.
winter, we're going to start running into some seasonal limitations as it relates to our ability to put down thermo. Certainly, I think there would be the opportunity to look at paint, but that, I think, as you get into the winter, I think we risk losing that even faster. So that would just be one point that staff would ask for consideration on.
Definitely thank you for that. And my goal is that we can have your decision at the first meeting in October for council to decide and vote on it. So hopefully that gives you still some more months of October.
Certainly, I think it would. I think it's all going to depend on how the weather goes.
How the
this
weather
winter.
goes, yep. So I want to say this, the safety issue is my concern. Again, I grew up biking on roads here in Raleigh. I grew up biking on roads with no such thing as a bike lane. And I get it and I understand it. The main thing is make sure people are safe. We hear about line of sight, but we also hear about cars going faster than what they should be doing. And until we create some other new tool that can take a car and automatically slow it down when it hits a certain point, maybe with automated cars, we'll figure that out with a trigger. But until then, one of our biggest ways to slow cars down is to make the road seem smaller. And unless we go out there and shrink this road, the only other way to do that is with cars parked on it. So that's where I stand, but this time we will hold this until our next meeting in September. And I thank you all for coming out. We are adjourned.